Welcome everyone. You are listening to the Central European Affairs podcast by the Budapest-based Civitas Institute. The debate of today's episode handles the question whether there is a future for Hungary and Poland outside the European Union. Our guests today are Leszek Balcerowicz and Péter Róna. The event is hosted by István Teplán. Leszek Balcerowicz is a Polish economist and professor at the Warsaw School of Economics. He served as chairman of the National Bank of Poland and twice deputy prime minister of Poland. He became Minister of Finance in the first non-communist government and led the free market economic reforms. He is the founder and chairman of the Council of the Warsaw-based Civil Development Forum. Péter Róna is a Hungarian economist, lawyer and businessman. He is a fellow of Blackfriars Hall, Oxford University, where he teaches economics and lectures on the methodology of the social sciences. He is the editor of Virtues and Economics, published by Springer. He is an award-winning artisan cheesemaker and renowned painter. He was on the governing board of the National Bank of Hungary and also worked for the Bank of England. István Teplán is a Hungarian economic historian, sociologist and president of Brussels-based Prosum Foundation. With George Soros, he is one of the founders of Central European University, where he also served as executive vice president.
Some people are very convinced that Hungary might follow a path of the UK and leave the European Union when it doesn't serve its leaders' interest or the interest of the group which is ruling Hungary for now over a decade, and they would be ready to cross the Rubicon and leave the EU. However, the recent development shows that the EU is giving in. So they gave in for the demands on the rule of law and a number of other issues, and this is not the first time. And the most recent opinion which pointed out, it was Timothy Garton-Ash in The Guardian, who said that, well, Britain was a democracy before 1973, and despite all the problems, it will remain a democracy after Brexit. But if Hungary leaves, the consequences are unpredictable. However, if they stay, it's even more dangerous, because this can lead to at least to a prolonged conflict within the European Union, which either cracks the core foundations of the EU and maybe split into two EU, or has so dire consequences that it might lead to a totally different EU. And if I can plagiarize Professor Róna, which I like so much, that the EU chose the common financial interest instead of its values, which are just as important to have a cohesion than the common financial gain. So how do you see, Professor Balcerowicz, what are the options and what are the consequences of each option?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me. I will focus on Poland, but against a background of what I call authoritarian transitions after free elections. And I understand you gave us two questions two potential scenarios, these two countries within the European Union and the potential scenario of, say, Brexit. And in this order, I will not engage in forecasts. This is useless, because forecasts are usually wrong. But rather, what would be scenario, what to do? First, the first question, the probable behavior of Poland and Hungary within the European Union. On Poland, the ruling country is not going to reverse its course and will try to continue to go forward. What does it mean? Here I would like to mention that every authoritarian transition after free elections uses three instruments. First, bribing the people or corruption. Second, propaganda, which requires capturing of the media. And third, which is most dangerous, it is frightening the people by capturing the state apparatus. Now, in Poland, as far as the first instrument is concerned, they went to the maximum, using the boom in Polish economy, which was largely due to the European boom. This is over. So the room for maneuver for further fiscal expansion is almost exhausted. And they've been benefited from the very good economic situation so far. But they've used, to a large extent, the room on the media by turning the state media into propaganda tool, probably worse than other communism. And just recently, they bought a private German media, which owns a lot of newspapers. And most likely, they would turn it into the propaganda tool. On the third instrument, which is the attempt to frighten the people, we are not yet Belarus, and there is a lot of resistance against that. But this would be decisive in the Polish conditions, whether they went even further or not. So if you assume that there would be no change in behavior on the part of peace, the party, so what would make the difference? Resistance. It is domestic and foreign. On domestic resistance, I would say that we have a growing pressure from organized groups in societies, especially the youth movement. They've been very passive, but recently they've been demonstrating against the recent decisions of the pseudo-constitutional tribunal. There's quite a change in behavior. And there is also growing resistance on the part of other groups in society, including the peasants. I am not saying this is decisive, but there's certainly a change. On political front, meaning the political parties, they are united regarding the rule of law. They are very much against what is being done to the rule of law in Poland, prosecution, courts, etc. But they are not united on two other issues. The first one, economy. And the second one, the attitude towards LGBT, this other agenda. And we know that it's very important that there's more cohesion, at least in the resistance to what's being done to Poland, and it remains to be seen. I can only say that the recent surveys show a decline in the support for the ruling party, and an increase, but it remains. On the European Union, I was never assuming that European Union would do the job for us. So I am not very much disappointed. And also, of course, I agree that the European Union has been neglecting for a very long time what Orban was doing, the European Union. What I can say, I cannot speak for them. My guess would be that at least some countries would try to catch up with a more critical attitudes towards Hungary and Poland, and I hope it will be done, but they need pressure. And what is very important is that the civil society organizations from Poland and Hungary would get even more in touch with the corresponding organization in the West, so that to put more pressure on the countries of European Union and the European Union institutions. On the second point, which is the potential scenario for Brexit. Of course, everybody is looking at the experience of Britain. And what is the conclusion? That Brexit is possible even in the liberal democracy. Why? Because of propaganda. Not because intimidation, because of propaganda. Very skillful, very demagogic, emotional propaganda can win. We know it not only from the British case. If, on the other hand, you've got something which is professional, okay, but it's unprofessional in communication. And this is a very important lesson. You need emotional propaganda, emotional communication, which would defend what is correct. Now, this is a warning, but there are, of course, differences. First, the support for the membership in the European Union, at least as expressed by the surveys in our country, is much stronger in the British case, partly because the raison d'etre for Hungary or Poland to be the member of the European Union is much stronger than the raison d'etre for Britain, for us. Geopolitically, it's extremely important, perhaps more for Poland than Hungary, I don't know. We are not bordering on Russia. We are bordering on Russia. And in Poland, it is sufficient so that even politicians whose policies to some extent resemble that of Putin are against Russia. This is the difference, I think, between Poland and Hungary, and I wonder why. Why Orban dares to be so pro-Russian, at least external, and no politician in Poland, even the worst one, would afford it because of the differences in our history. Now, the significance of British example serves as a warning signal, but at the same time, we know there are differences. And I would guess that, of course, one cannot rule out exit in the case of Hungary on Poland, but it can only happen if it happens under anti-liberal. I am not using illiberal democracy because I think it is a nonsense. You have either a democracy which is called liberal, or you have non-democracy, which is a mock democracy. So it only the exit of Poland or Hungary, I think, if it happens only if democracy is not restored. And it can happen under two scenarios, under something which is non-democracy. First, a massive propaganda in the situation when there are no alternative media. Then you would have a total brainwashing, etc., etc. And the second case is massive propaganda plus intimidation of the opposition. I think in Polish case, massive propaganda would not be enough. If anybody attempted Brexit, you would need intimidation so that opponents of these measures would be silenced, or at least they would have much less possibilities to act. The conclusion is, future is open, and I think instead of dedicating a lot of time to prophecies and forecasts, let us focus on what can be done to block the worst scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if Professor Róna could also elaborate, he has I know very strong opinion about this, and recently I heard a radio interview with you where, to me, you painted a quite dark picture where with a very few taboos in the EU, pretty much anything goes.
Right. Thank you very much for this invitation, and a great pleasure to be on this podcast with the distinguished former finance minister of Poland. Pleasure to meet you again. I would like to advance and defend three propositions of the basis of which I will draw a conclusion in response to your question. The first proposition is that the recent decision of the European Union in relation to the budget and the COVID-19 relief package is a victory for Orban and Kaczynski in the sense that it has shifted the dial on a basic tension within the European Union that has been there for quite some time, and that is the tension between a value-based community versus an interest-based community, and it has moved the dial in the direction of an interest-based community. Now, the European Union Treaty, in its Section 2 and Section 3, makes it very clear that the European Union is essentially in all important respects, a value-based community as opposed to an interest-based community. So in that sense, this decision is not really consistent with the spirit and intent of the treaty. I should perhaps just briefly mention that in the history of the evolution of the European community, its founders, original founders, and that would be Adenauer, de Gaulle, de Gasperi, Jean Monnet, Robert Schuman, and perhaps Henri Spaak, and a few others, were all of them Catholics, deeply religious Catholics, for whom a kind of a Thomist, virtue-based ethics was quite fundamental, as opposed to a consequentialist ethic which characterized the Anglo-Saxon world, including, of course, most notably Britain. So the Anglo-Saxon consequentialist ethics, which found its great expression in utilitarian theories and utilitarian economics and utilitarian liberalism, was not something that these people were particularly attracted to. They were also not particularly attracted to any form of nationalism or any kind of an overemphasis of notions of national sovereignty, because for a Catholic, there is really only one sovereign, ultimately, and that's God. So politicians who rely a great deal on the notion of sovereignty are in effect usurping the authority of God, and as such are committing really a sin. So their inclination to bring into being a supranational community that is not about sovereignty but about virtues is quite understandable in the light of the most fundamental Catholic theology. But the dial has been shifted, and to that extent, that's where we are. Now, whether this is just a short-term temporary shift and the dial will go back to its previous position and even more in the direction of a value-based society remains to be seen. I do not at all consider it impossible that that's what will happen, particularly as the very negative consequences of a Brexit will come into focus, and that the sort of political theory that had given rise to Brexit, and also, of course, the positions of Hungary and Poland in relation to the EU, will appear to be increasingly undesirable throughout Europe. So that's my first proposition. The second proposition is that while that is going on, there is taking place a quite fundamental shift in the structure of the world economy, most notably the structure of the economies of the developed countries, of the advanced economies of the world. And that is brought about by artificial intelligence and robots, the introduction of which significantly undermines the scope of the paradigm that has been followed by Central Europe since 1989, which is based on supplying cheap labor to the multinational corporations. with the arrival of robots and artificial intelligence, the weight of labor costs in the total costs of production seriously declines to about a third of what it had been hitherto. Now, this means that the importance and the significance of these countries, most notably Hungary, and to some extent also Poland, has a much more independent, autonomous economy than Hungary, so it is less reliant on this paradigm. Hungary is very heavily reliant on this paradigm. So as these things begin to bite, the quite fundamental economic paradigm on which the Hungarian model is built and on which Orbán's political power is founded will start to run into very serious difficulties. And I think it's worth noting that Orbán had done nothing in recent years, and nothing ever, to respond to this challenge. And the time to respond to this challenge is very, very short indeed. Its first effects are already appearing, and I think in 2, 3, 4 years' time, the gravity of the issue will become dramatic. So that's the second proposition. The third proposition is a very simple one. In a few months' time, Merkel is leaving, and apparently so is Putin, who is reported to be quite ill. Mm-hmm. Yeah. With that, even if it's only Merkel who is leaving in a few months' time, we have a new political constellation, and if Putin follows her, as it is expected, then what you get is a rather new dynamic of the situation. Now, just focusing on Merkel, I do not think that Merkel has been very good for the future of the European Union. I think she has made serious mistakes, and unlike her predecessor, Kohl, never fully understood what the European Union was meant to be all about. She navigated, she balanced this value-based structure versus an interest-based structure with skill, but generated in the process a great deal of confusion. And as part of that confusion, she has totally backed Orbán and protected him all these years. And apparently she's now, today, actively engaged in protecting the leader of the Fidesz faction in the European Parliament, Tamás Deutsch, and is doing everything to make sure that he's not expelled from the People's Party faction. Whether she will succeed or not, we'll see, I guess, in the next 24 hours or so. But she is leaving. And therefore, there is a question of what new dynamic situation will arrive. However, and this is my conclusion, one important effect of the past 10 years, and most notably the most recent 3 or 4 years, is the perception now very broadly, very widely held in the European community at all levels, is that Hungary simply doesn't fit. It doesn't fit into the European, into the kind of civilization that the European Union was meant to bring about, even if we accept this balancing act between interests and values that is associated with Merkel's period in office. So, quite apart from the very quite outrageous statements that have been made by people like Deutsch and Orbán, and unacceptable insults of European leaders and European community, Hungary's behavior and the rather weak response, ineffective response from opposition parties and from Hungarian society in general gives rise to an old European perception about Hungary that was so important, so decisive in Versailles, in the formation of the Versailles Treaty, that in relation to Hungary, you're really not talking about the European people. There's something about them that is not quite, doesn't quite fit into Europe, and that therefore they should be handled accordingly. Now, this quite awful and tragic perception is very much on the rise again. One hears it in various shapes or forms, in various comments that are followed. This would mean that it's not really a question whether Orbán wants to lead Hungary out of the European Union or not. And that certainly is a possible issue, may have effect. But more broadly and more basically, it sets up Hungary to be ready for a tragedy, one way or the other. Because at this stage, apart from Merkel, Hungary really has no friends in the European Union. And at this stage, as I say, the overall perception is that there's something odd about these people, in addition to their very strange language. Behavior is quite weird. We don't know what to make of it. Doesn't fit. And that can trigger a series of events and that sort of resembles what happened in Versailles a century ago. That's about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And my second question to both of you would be, and first of all, I agree what you said that probably it was an important factor for Merkel to save her legacy with this compromise. It probably did more damage to her legacy in the long run than anything else. But if I want to reuse your equation, what Peter you said, and to my extent Leszek, that a European Union where you receive the money and the financial report which you submit after the spending of the money is more or less acceptable for the accountants, then you do whatever you want within your own country. We won't interfere. And what Timothy Garton-Ash pointed out as a historian who knows this region, he said, then not just these pet dictators of Merkel's, but other dictators will mushroom, wannabe dictators and populists will mushroom around the EU, and this is a big danger for the EU. But still, I think this is a lesser danger, because I don't think that these peripheral dictators can really change the core of the EU. The only thing can happen that they will be separated off from the core and left alone as a cordon sanitaire or whatever, if you go back to all historical terms. But there is another thing, and you as economists, I want you to react, that abandoning the values, it has economic consequences, because Orbán is actually attacking all the fundamentals of democracy. He's attacking the pluralistic democracy. He wants to be in power forever. He attacking the free market, the competition, because it's all distorted. I mean, there's favorism, special deals, even if they are German companies benefiting, but they distorting the market. And of course, the rule of law, which is making an uncertain legal environment, not only for citizens, but also for companies, foreign investors. And if you attack all these, then the consequence is not only that it's encouraging other dictators, but you generate a situation that inevitably will lead to pauperization, you know, low investment, very little innovation, and you know, most of all, the exodus of all those people who don't want to live in these circumstances, want to do something better. And you explained this to me once, Peter, that for a foreign company, then it's not the most important thing that you get a tax break and some slave level wages, but there are other circumstances in an economy that make it functions. And I think abandoning these will have great and dark consequences for the economies. That if they, as they say in Hungarian, if you throw the leash among the horses, you will pay a price for it, and then you will have economies who either will be a permanent problem, apply for, you know, aid and whatever, and an exodus of the young people. So it's not only just you know, a bunch of sentimentals want to keep the society nice and clean, but this is the very functioning, the flesh and blood of the economy, which they now put into limbo. Or am I wrong? Leszek?
Well, perhaps on the economy, on the Professor Róna remarks about bad prospects for Hungary because of the present structure, I would say the following thing. The strategy which Hungary followed and Poland followed and Slovakia and Czech Republic, namely opening the economy and being open to foreign direct investment, was the best one compared to alternative strategies. Look at Russia, look at Ukraine. But, the foreign direct investment has been very strong in exports. In Poland, even though we are a large country, export sector is very successful. And within the export sector, there are many foreign-based firms with foreign capital. So that we do not confuse the past with the future. On the future, very much depends to what extent there will be a restructuring, to what extent Hungarian or Polish enterprises would participate in new technology. But I agree with one point, namely that all our countries, both Hungary and Poland, have been heavily dependent on foreign direct investment from Germany, which was completely understandable. But probably the importance of traditional car sector in Germany would decline. And this could gradually hit smaller countries, which have been so reliable on German car companies. And I understand Hungary belongs to this group, but also Slovakia and Czech Republic, Poland to a lesser extent. The first point. The second point, I am all in sympathy with the rule of law. And they are very much against those who violate this, meaning capturing, prosecution, police, and ultimately the courts. But you may imagine a certain partition. You could have a justice system which prosecutes the opposition, but protects the foreign direct investment. And I understand so far, foreign companies are not complaining about Orban, while you don't have a rule of law regarding the other dimension. And this can continue to some extent with this sort of partition. An example is Singapore. Singapore is not a democracy, they are controlled media, but they ensure a perfect protection of foreign direct investment. In other countries, Malaysia, certainly not democracy, but a lot of foreign direct investment. I am not I am to stress. I am a rate of sympathy. I am very much against the violation of the rule of law, but I want to inject a realistic note. This is not going to happen automatically only because Orban is a quasi-dictator. He is shrewd enough to to ensure the protection of foreign direct investment and foreign companies. So, but the conclusion is we have to compensate for that within our countries.
Peter?
Yeah, I don't disagree with what has been said. My point, however, is slightly different. I am saying that foreign capital is going to leave not because there are problems with the rule of law, but because the fundamental structure of costs, the economic factors of their activities, shift away from reliance on low labor costs. I saw recently an analysis by one of the major German car companies, very active in Hungary, that predicts that within the next 5 years, their labor costs will fall to about 8% of their total costs. Now, under these circumstances, their option is to stay where they are in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, or to go home. What sort of cost advantage are you going to get over an 8% cost base? Let's say that the labor costs in Hungary will remain to be about half of the German labor costs, right? So you're talking about possibly a 4% advantage by remaining. Not a great deal. And when you factor in all the other factors that go into that decision, it is really a marginal decision at that stage, and certainly not the sort of advantage that would encourage other companies to make new investments. So the labor cost as a factor in making direct investment decisions by multinationals has very much receded into the background. And I think you will see that dynamic play out. With that, this very powerful and strong tie between Orban and German industry, and therefore Chancellor Merkel, is going to loosen. It's simply going to loosen. They're not going to be all that interested in this. German industry, what is going on within German industry today is that this low labor cost based model is a 20th century model, that the 21st century is about higher added value creation through higher skills, higher abilities, research and development, and so on and so forth. So it's all about innovation, new products, new methods, new this, new that. And I think that the power of that argument was shown in the context of this COVID crisis and how the pharmaceutical companies responded to it, how brilliantly they responded to it, showing that the economics are now entirely different. I mean, this German company that is in partnership with Pfizer today has a market cap that is bigger than the Deutsche Bank. So it's about 35-40% of Daimler's market cap, and that company did not exist 12 years ago. So the dynamic of the world economy based on science and technology is a radically different one. It also, by the way, has serious implications for China and its much vaunted and much celebrated emergence as a power. China's emergence is based on low labor costs and an industrial structure that rides on the advantage of low labor costs. What the reality today is that technology can make Fortune 500 companies, or the equivalents in the world economy, FTSE 100 or the others, obsolete within a matter of months. That's the reality.
Well, but this is a very general point with potential applications to Hungary. But the links are not very strong, let me be frank. Because if you look at the stock exchange, you see that besides these internet companies, the majority are not internet companies, they are still surviving. Okay, but there's a link, the link between these very interesting general points and Hungary and Poland is not very strong. That's the first point. The second point is, I don't like, frankly speaking, the popular expression low wages. Because in what counts and what counted was the relationship between wages and productivity. And as productivity was increasing, and that was increasing very fast in Poland and in Hungary, thanks largely to foreign direct investment, wages were increasing. And wages in Poland or Hungary are much higher than, say, in Ukraine or other countries without foreign direct investment. So it's rather about whether the future investment would produce further increases in productivity, which would compensate for further increases in wages. But wages have increased a lot. But I generally agree that many countries, including Poland and Hungary, are facing the problem of structural changes in the world economy and in their economies, and then what would count would be institutional system, whether it would provide enough competition, enough economic freedom, and also enough of private property rights. Well, so this would be even more important in new technologies work than until now.
I think we probably disagree on this point. I mean, just to cite a concrete example, the electric cars' labor content today it's about a third of what an internal combustion engine car requires. And in terms of the assembly work that is done, it's even less. Now, with the rapid introduction of robots and artificial intelligence, it will diminish even further. So you are talking about the short-term dislocation of a very significant proportion of the labor force in Hungary, because the car industry in Hungary is built on the internal combustion engine, and the internal combustion engine is gone; it's finished. It doesn't take it simply does not take that amount of labor to make the electric car, and the heart of the electric car. The component that is expensive, that is important, is not going to be made in Hungary. It's going to be made in Germany.
I think we should, because we cannot continue. It would require much more time.
So
for this discussion.
But I think the basic point is that there is this shift.
I'm not denying. The question is how fast and under what conditions the shift would be more smoother, and under what conditions it would be more abrupt. But this is a huge subject for the economist.
Yeah. Okay.
The last part, I would like to go back to the original question a little bit. Though Hungary and Poland are different, and the car companies still benefit from the Hungarian location, but you can't not notice that how many foreign banks withdrew from Hungary. You know, that with the brutal takeover of the saving banks, of the local saving banks, which is alone a very interesting story, how the government forced and literally confiscated the properties of the saving banks, and this totally chaotic environment for the banks resulted in a lot of the banks withdrawing from Hungary, and a lot of companies who headquartered in Budapest are not here anymore. This is not the 90s. Of course, there was the crisis and everything, but here they're now the target is the retail sector. They openly said that we want to take that over too. And I think Poland and Hungary are different, because I think Poland, like religious bigotry, looks genuine to me. It's a genuine.
No, you are wrong. First, there's a very sharp decline in the support of Catholic Church. That's the fastest decline in the world during the last 10, 15 years, largely because of the behavior of Catholic hierarchy, which behaves shamelessly. Second point, unfortunately, Poland and Hungary are not that different on the banking sector, because during the last 5 years, we have nationalizations. State companies which enjoy monopoly position have been buying foreign banks. And now the share of state-owned banks in Poland is over 40%. It's after Belarus and Russia. And also there were nationalization in the energy sector, which is again dominated by state companies.
I see, because Orban apparently had a master plan that he said after being in government for 4 years and they lost. He said that we were in government, but we weren't in power, which meant what he calls the deep structure of the state, that we have to take that over, which means building a completely mafia-like economy. So, and probably you have to correct with me this, Leszek, too, but somehow in Poland it's not so visible like in Hungary, because in Hungary, almost like a third world dictatorship, it absolutely shameless use of the political power for the enrichment of one family and clientele and the oligarchs. And this is why people believe that if the situation in the EU changes to something negative, Orban is not just bluffing, he would leave. And then I would really like to know your opinion, what you think, what would be the future of course, Poland is much bigger, but, still in the same geopolitical pressure, Russia and China and Turkey and whatever. So what, is there a feasible, comprehensible future outside of the EU?
Well, it's a future, but much worse. And the difference is so huge that everything possible should be done to prevent this scenario. I think it is possible to prevent it, but there's no guarantee. And instead, as I said, and this is my end note, I understand, of engaging in processes and focus, I am spending most of my time in mobilizing the public opinion in Poland, and if possible, in the European Union. So I am very active on Twitter. I am very proud that I have 350,000 followers on Twitter in Poland. I am very active on Facebook. I am almost 100,000. I am all over the media, because this is the time to mobilize the public opinion. And I'm also in touch much more discreetly with the political parties in Poland. I have no ambition to return to politics, but I do my best to strengthen and to mobilize the opposition. And this is the key. You don't have a guarantee, but if you do not act, there's a guarantee that you lose.
Maybe you have to do that on a Central European level.
This is what we are doing now.
Yeah.
We can continue. Okay?
Peter, your last word?
Well, I don't think that Orban wants to take Hungary out of the European Union, because I don't think that Hungary can afford to be out of the European Union. Not only is it a question of being poorer, but I think that Hungary is so dependent on the European Union to a much greater extent than Poland, that a withdrawal from the European Union will lead to actually a total collapse and very serious conflicts and problems with our neighbors. It will be a much weaker Hungary out of the European Union that will revive historic conflicts with neighboring countries. And without the European Union, Hungary is not able to deal with those conflicts. So I don't think you'll want to do that. That does not mean that Hungary cannot, by accident or by inevitability, fall out of the European Union. It can happen. And I think that was my final point, that because there is this growing perception that Hungary simply doesn't fit into the European Union, a series of events will just pile up that will push Hungary further and further away from the European Union. And then something happens, and there you have it, you see. So that's my view.
You've just listened to the latest episode of the Central European Affairs podcast by the Budapest-based Civitas Institute. If you like the podcast, follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We are glad to welcome you back with the next episode.